Government drama llama ding dong, talking about the fake degree thing. More specifically, in regards to 100,000 certificates that were seized as part of a scam. To explain some of the history of how it got to that particular environment where that could exist, we need to go back a little bit and talk about Raju. For those unfamiliar, Raju was the founder of Satyam Computer Services, or India's Enron. For many of us that were going through school during the early 2000s, one of the things we noticed is that a lot of companies were starting to use India for computer services. That didn't happen by accident. Raju was one of the co-founders of Satyam Computer Services, and it did start out as a small company, but it was when John Deere was one of their first clients that they really started to take off. Throughout the 90s, companies would bring people from India over to the United States to do computer programming. Raju set up some of his employees in a building down the street from one of the companies so that he could show that, look, we're working remotely, we're down the street, what's the difference between working here versus in India? This basically showed that companies could save a lot of money because instead of shipping people over to the United States, they could just have the work get done over there. I will add one caveat that certain data isn't supposed to leave the United States. It has to remain within the US, such as health data, for many reasons. Near the end of the 90s, there was also the whole Y2K apocalypse thing because people were freaking out about computers moving over from year 99 to 0 because what are computers going to do? Raju's company, among others, realized, hey, we can bring in a bunch of people to fix that so we can clean and scrape all of that data. After the year 2000 arrived and there wasn't a machine uprising, this also created an opportunity for these companies to be like, hey, so you might as well keep us on working for your company because we've been able to do all this work for you, right? And by 2001, Satyam Computer Services was added to the New York Stock Exchange. I know this seems like I'm taking a rabbit trail from the scam thing, but stay with me. Now that Raju's company is part of the New York Stock Exchange, there's a lot more competition and pressure to make sure that they keep having rising revenue each quarter. And participating in this capitalist hellscape means you have to keep showing growth, growth, growth. So around 2001, 2002, he starts creating fake revenues and fake accounts. Or as white-collar crime calls it, creative accounting. The long and short of it is that on paper, the company is valued at over $1 billion, but in reality, the company actually is worth less than $1 billion. However, he reaches a point where he has to try something new to cover up the creative accounting, which is where MyTask Construction comes in. And this is another company that he owns, and his way to cover up the money that's missing, quote unquote, is he's going to use money from Satyam Computer Services to buy MyTask Construction Service. Before this merger can happen, though, in September 2008, there was a stock market crash. Lehman Brothers and other companies basically cried to the government for a bailout, again, a whole other issue. Some companies start pulling their contracts from Satyam Computer Services, which means less money, which means now he has even more of a hole to fix within his accounting. In September 2008, the board approved this merger, but less than 12 hours later, shareholders on the other side of the world went, hold up, why is an IT company buying a construction company? So the merger doesn't happen, and in January 2009, Raju sends an email out to the company and shareholders and everyone saying, yeah, so my bad. Many people in India felt that this was a calculated move because if he gets tried for his crimes in India, it's going to be a lot less harsher of a sentence than it would be if it's in the United States. Keep all this in mind for part 2. Welcome back to part 2. If you remember from part 1, Raju's confession about his crimes was a calculated move, but as a result, the government had to step in, and they had to pay the salaries that had not been paid, and then they had to convince companies not to drop their contracts. And in order to keep it going, it was bought by a rival IT company. In this part, I want to focus more on the ramifications of what came out of this case. Obviously, with the loss of business, there was a lot of unemployment. With the loss of contracts, they would have to get rid of employees because there's no contract for them to work on and no money coming in. Even for those that either stayed employed there or went to work at other companies, the problem is it left a black mark on their work history. Even though this crime was perpetrated by those at the top of the company, everyone underneath still gets the ramifications of the fact that now there's a stain on the name of this company. People outside of the company may not want to hire someone that worked there because who knows if they were also part of this scheme. This is the same thing that happened to people that worked at Enron or worked for the company that Elizabeth Holmes had started. To work around this, when they were looking for new work, people would either change the name of the company that they worked for or say they were a consultant or just leave off that work history altogether. Another complication to this is that many people who had worked for this company were proud to have done so because it was one of the 4 major IT tech companies. Working for these companies meant you had good pay and good benefits. It did bring some people to a higher socioeconomic status. keep that point in mind. We're going to circle back to it. Another thing that came from India's Enron is that there was really kind of a lack of punishment for Raju. Even though the investigation and court case started soon after his confession, it wasn't until 2015 that he had a conviction. Raju was sentenced to 7 years in jail, and he served all 7 years. Of course he didn't. He only served 33 months in jail. There were some legal precedents that were set by this court case, but to the general public, it looks like you can basically commit this kind of crime and nothing's really going to happen to you. This article from 2025 states that Raju, the man behind the collapse of the tech giant, is out on bail and is using his once celebrated entrepreneurial skills to mentor his sons and oversee family businesses. Raju's immediate family members and their businesses are flourishing. The family is one of the richest in Hyderabad, with his older son and daughter-in-law running successful businesses in agriculture and healthcare, respectively. If you want even more information on how all this went down, there is an episode of Bad Boy Billionaires of India focused on this case, and this actually was delayed for a little bit because Raju argued that this contained half-truths and would tarnish his reputation, unlawfully invade his privacy. To which Netflix said the documentary is just a depiction of publicly available records and nowhere does it focus on his personal life. The idea was to make people aware of one of the largest corporate frauds in India Inc.'s history. For many people, getting a job in IT is still something that they are striving for. And if you have court cases like this where you do something illegal and you basically get a slap on the wrist, I mean, government drama llama ding dong, talking about those fake computer degrees again, part 3. Bet you didn't think we'd get back to the fake degree thing after all of that, but here we are. Because IT jobs were desirable, one of the things people started doing was making sure that their kid would be able to get a degree and get a job. I will start out by saying there are people in India who did go through and get legitimate degrees and can code. I'm not talking about those people. Because this field can be competitive, sometimes parents would pay off teachers or pay off professors to make sure that their kid would pass. Maybe there was a friend or family member at a company and they would use that connection to get them a foot in the door and be like, oh, you should help your friend, brother, sister, cousin, uncle, nephew, whatever. If a company cares more about the bottom line versus each worker's individual contribution, it makes it easier to cover up when people don't know how to do their job, and it ends up overworking the people that are qualified. This also opened up something called coding boot camps, which are often scams. In India, coding boot camps such as New Camp, the Hacking School, 100 Times Engineers, Coding Ninja, Masai School, Simple Learn, and a few others have often been hailed as fast-track solutions to lucrative tech careers, promising high salaries and a path to success in an industry where demand for high-skilled professionals is growing. But when looking for shortcuts for high-paying jobs as software engineers, these boot camps offering fancy certificates are increasingly becoming synonymous with disappointment and frustration for their students. They rope people into these scams by using certain tactics such as bait and switch. Many online education scams start with a low-cost introductory course, which quickly turn into high-pressure sales pitch for more expensive programs. They also use fake reviews and testimonials to make it sound like it's a good program when it actually isn't. If you actually look at the content, most of it is subpar quality, and a lot of them are pre-recorded even though they might market it as a live interactive session. They also use targeted advertising such as influencer. This article from 2025 is about the Kerala police who found out about this fake degree racket. The kingpin Dinesh, I'm not sure, alias Danny, who had earlier been arrested in 2013 for similar offenses, is accused of rebuilding and vastly expanding the operation after completing his jail term. Remember that thing from part 2 where there seems to be a lack of punishment for these kind of crimes? Of course, for an operation this size, you need a lot of people involved to make it work, such as people playing specific roles from printing and transporting fake certificates to distributing them through recruitment agencies targeting job seekers, especially those seeking overseas employment. Another thing is that the certificates were printed with the names of well-known universities and later customized with candidate details. And to avoid detection, the documents were first sent to Bengaluru? Okay, I don't know how to say that. Then redistributed to agents in different states. Investigators seized hundreds of printers, computers, forged holograms, seals, and stamps from Pollachi, Sivakasi, and other locations. So when you have people that are desperate to get a job in IT and may not have a way to get into a university for whatever reason, this can seem like a workaround. And in part 4, I'll discuss the other scam this environment created. Time for the final part, or part 4, for how we ended up with a bunch of workers that had fake computer degrees or certificates. Not only do people get scammed into education that isn't necessarily actual education, they also get scammed into certain jobs which end up being human trafficking, basically. They're sort of a legal contract, but we'll get into that. One of the issues they started having with focusing on India for computer programmers is that there was starting to be a lot of high turnover, and so they started focusing on other areas like East Europe and countries in Africa. They would pay slightly more sometimes, but you would have far less turnover. How does this turn into human trafficking? Well, they give you upfront pay, and getting a large sum of money at once can seem like a good deal. These contracts might be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and it's extremely, extremely hard to get out of it, and if you try to get out of it, then you might have to pay that full amount back, or possibly even interest on top of it. Let's say you decide that you think you're going to go ahead and do the upfront pay, you worked out the math, and you think, you know what, I might be okay with that. Turns out you might be working up to 80-hour work weeks and have no benefits, no paid time off, things like that. Let's say someone at the company that you're contracted with really likes you and want to hire you on as a permanent employee. You don't get to do that. They heavily focus on getting people that want to work in places like the US because it can be lucrative pay compared to where they live. So as a result, they might hold your passports, immigration papers, things like that. So even if you want to leave the company and maybe you can pay that full amount back, if they've got your passport or they're holding papers that keep you from leaving the country, you're kind of in a bad spot. Some of you may remember Elon Musk putting up a picture on Twitter of all of the people that were still working for him and that they weren't American. There's a good chance that a lot of those were still working at Twitter because they had an H-1B visa tied to their employment, or they might have been under one of these type of contracts. Another sign that people might be working under one of these quote-unquote contracts is that they're heavily discouraged from talking with coworkers or clients. All of this to say, what started as Raju working with John Deere to show that you could have people in India work remotely ended up to where we are now. It's one of the factors that led to a highly competitive environment where people want one of these lucrative IT jobs. The increasing competition for these types of jobs means there's going to be more people trying to get the degree needed for these things, and that leads to more opportunities for scams and people to take advantage of that. This then leads into the legal contracts or human trafficking. That's why stuff like this isn't a surprise when you find out that all these people that have these degrees aren't necessarily qualified for the job they have. One way to start fixing this problem is to get rid of these types of contracts. The job market is already tough, and stuff like this certainly doesn't help.